Okay, Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. All right, so here we'll start with the same questions we had with Cain, right? Again, it seems that God is being irrational, capricious, insecure, say some of you, right? So again, I'll set up the story, right? You have finally human beings doing something together, right? Human beings. By the way, it's interesting because the text, interesting detail, text says that God told them to scatter, and they were like, no, right? We're gonna stay in one spot and build this tower, right? And notice how we're moving away from the garden. This is further east, right? It mentions there's some interesting details, right? I hope you're noticing these details. These are very interesting. They move further east, meaning we're moving away from this kind of receptive approach to, to grace, to more like striving, um, work-oriented or works-oriented approach, right? So instead of scattering like God wanted them to, they stay in one place and they start to build this tower. And there's nothing wrong with that, really. You know, I mean, maybe they want some stability. Maybe they're an agrarian society and they need to stay in one place to grow crops, which is legit, right? So, and then they build and they're like very successful. It's going this temple or this ziggurat or whatever, this tower is working well. They're working in unity. There's a strong um, hermeneutical field of unity in the text. We'll talk about this in a bit. And God, right, as always, is unhappy, right? Nothing we can do is enough, right? It's like for once human beings are cooperating, they're at peace, they're working in harmony, and God is like, they're too powerful. He basically says that, right? And nothing that they do will be impossible. And God is like, oh, hell no. And he goes down and I think I thought originally I thought he destroyed the tower, but he doesn't. He doesn't destroy. All he does, he has a kind of a passive aggressive way of dealing with this, right? He decides to confound their language, like he's playing, right? And now the people, they cannot communicate. They start to fight. They're like, "What are you saying? I don't understand." And now they're forced to scatter, and each moving with their own tribes, right? Okay, that's the story. So all right, here's the question then. And again, we have to find the clues in the text, right? If we're going to read this with mother's house lens, we have to see that God has some kind of purpose, right? Notice how we have to read deeper, right? To really get to the meaning of these texts. If you just stay on the surface, it looks like God is irrational, capricious. So we have to look to the clues that the author is leaving behind so we can really understand what is actually going on. This is typical of the literature we're doing, right? The Mother's House texts belong to a set of literature which is called wisdom literature. Wisdom literature, one of the main features, nothing is as it seems. Write this down. In wisdom literature, nothing is as it seems. And we'll see this especially with Job next week, right? So let's look at the clues. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find more clues in parallel with chapter 12. But I want to see what you guys have found in terms of what is really wrong with the tower. What is going on? Is God just being insecure, or is there again an ethical lesson that is being missed, right? And that God is trying to teach them? What do you think? Okay, Edmonds, you're first. First in line. Oh my God, I
All
forgot.
right. So I wrote about this in my reading response. And what I said was that I saw a parallel between eating the fruit in the Garden of Eden and destroying the Tower of Babel, or trying to build the Tower of Babel, I should say. In Genesis 3, God says, "The man has become like one of us to know good and evil, and now lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever, the man gets sent out of the Garden of Eden." Um, and now here, man is trying to build a tower that will reach the heavens, which is another disregard for earthly limits. I think it's more of this same issue with limits,
Good.
with man trying to reach beyond the earthly limits that God has imposed, and being too focused on, again, I think it's an example of hubris, trying to be as good as the gods, something like that.
Yes, excellent. That's one of the points I was going to make, right? There's the negation of limits. Again, same scenario, right? And we know what happens when you negate the limits. Remind me, what are you missing when you want everything to be possible for you? What are you missing in life, Olivera?
Protection.
What?
You miss some protection. You say the limitations were supposed to give you protection of some kind.
Protect you from what?
From yourself.
Okay, good. Yes, right, exactly. Right. We saw again. I keep on repeating this because it's such an important point. The limits are there to teach us about otherness, right? They're there to contract us to make room for another. If everything is within our reach and we can possess anything, there can never be another human being. Everything is just an object for our own nourishment, right? So the limits are there to teach us ethics, teach us here you stop because here you cannot have, right? And this is the beginning of relationships. True relationship is when you engage with another person and they're not just another object to be consumed by you, right? The person is the forbidden fruit. Every human being around us should be seen as a variation on the forbidden fruit that you cannot eat. This person you cannot possess, control, master, feed upon, right? So this is what the tree is teaching. And here, again, this idea, I don't want any limits. I want to do what I want. And this is the beginning of immorality, right? So God is perhaps sensing that. So that's a really good point. Excellent. Anybody else sees anything else wrong with the Babylonians from our text? While you think, I'm going to go get my water, which I've left in the kitchen. So hold on a second. I'll be right back. Okay. So, any answers come up with what was wrong with the Babylonians, apart from this limitless, this lack of limits that they were seeking? Anybody else come up with something? Are you gonna make me do all the work? Okay, Rudolph, go ahead.
So the Lord recognizes that the people is one, whereas the mother's point of view is that there is diversity and collaboration between different mindsets, personalities, and individuals.
Yes, very good. This was going to be my punchline, but I'm going to bring it now since you're bringing it up. This is, in my view, the main issue here. When you read the text, you have what we call a semantic field. Let me write this word in the semantic field. This is where you have an atmosphere. Semantic field is like an atmosphere. So this atmosphere is created by the repetition of a word, which doesn't come out in the English, but in the Hebrew is very strong, is the repetition of the word echad, which means one. So if you were to read the text in the Hebrew, it would read something like this. Everyone on earth had one language, one word, right? And they migrated from the east. Come, let us make one tower, one city, right? And so forth. So you have this kind of repetition of one, 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 one. And especially the notion of one language, if we are to examine what that means, right? One language is not just they're speaking the same language. One language means one worldview, one thought, one logos, one rationality, no other, right? So we are here, the main issue, and there's others, we'll talk about it when we do the parallels with Genesis 12, but the main issue here, which makes God deeply uncomfortable, is this beginning of a kind of a totalitarian society where there is only one narrative that everybody has to follow, right? This is a kind of false peace versus real peace. False peace, you shut up the dissent and you keep one narrative, right? And then we have peace, yes. But it's a false peace because everybody has been shut down, right? True peace is the ability for many voices to coordinate, right? But here we have the creation of a false peace, only one narrative, one way of thinking, and everything else is set aside. We are here in all types of distorted societies, right? We are here, you can look at this phenomenon today, is still going on, right? The colonialism, spirit of colonialism is a one word, right? if you studied a little bit the history of colonialism, the colonizers would come into the countries and say, we have the civilization, you have nothing, right? In fact, you're from the devil, and we will impose on you our language, our laws, our schools, our hospitals, and you have nothing to say about it, right? So this is very much similar to the Babylonian mentality. You have totalitarian regimes, obviously, in the past, Stalinism, fascism, Nazism, and you have even, today, when we talk about, if I may go in that direction, when we talk about, wanting to, when we as a country go around other countries and say, you guys need to become democracies like us, right? I mean, it's a mixed bag, because yes, democracy has plurality, but it's still one system that we want to impose, right? So anytime, right? Anytime you want to impose one way of thinking, and this has happened politically, this has happened in the religions, right? One way of thinking, one way of worshiping, one way of seeing God, right? All over, right? This is the temptation of any type of community. Remember, these stories are archetypal, right? This is the temptation of the one, of this kind of a homogeneous way of thinking and acting and believing that God is deeply uncomfortable with. And so now we can understand better why he confuses the languages. What is he doing actually when he's confusing the languages? What's this move doing that is helping, redeeming the situation? Yes, Christodoulou.
Almost counterintuitively, he is making them get to know each other by confusing their languages.
And before knowing each other, what do they become now that their languages are confused? Is there still one word, one worldview, one way of thinking when you have different languages?
Yeah, there's a diversity of different ideas.
Yeah. Right, this is the creation of diversity, right? God is saying, I'm uncomfortable with homogeneity. I need diversity. This world needs diversity. We cannot have just one truth. We cannot have just one religion. We cannot have just one way of having, one economic system or one political system. We need a variety. And God, in a way, is recreating or enabling the awakening to diversity again. Now we have many languages, many worldviews, many religions, many ways of thinking. And God, this is where he's happy. This should be a great lesson, I think, especially for Christianity, who has wanted to, conquer the world for so many years. And God seems to be saying, I don't know if that's a good idea, right? Maybe I like these Buddhists over there and these Hindus over there and these Muslims. And sometimes I wonder if God is not a little bit preoccupied with the way that Christianity or some Islam also is doing that, trying to conquer. By the way, in Islam, just to give a nuanced view on that, in the Quran, actually, it's interesting. I was really surprised and pleasantly, it was very pleasant to read that. God says, I have created the many religions. Right, Christodoulou, right? This is in the Quran, that actually God acknowledges that he has himself created diversity and that he loves this diversity. This is interesting, right? So this is why perhaps Islam was much more tolerant than Christianity. When they conquered, they would allow Judaism and Christianity to continue to perform their worship services, and Christianity, no. Right? So very interesting story, which is warning us, right? Anytime the world becomes united under one narrative and one narrative only, and there's no room for dissent, we should feel uncomfortable, right? Now, I don't want to go into what we're doing with COVID, right? But sometimes, right, whether we're pro-vax or anti-vax, I get flustered at the fact that there is only one narrative and no debate. There, I said it, right? So there are moments in our societies where we start to opt for one narrative and we push aside any other narrative. And the text is teaching us, when this happens, beware, be uncomfortable. Even if the narrative is a good one, the fact that there is only one narrative should be already suspicious, right? Rudolph, go ahead.
Well, it's very apropos because today is the 6th of January, and about a year ago, we had a very unfortunate incident in Washington, D.C., where thousands of people believed in one narrative.
Yeah, I mean, this is why, in a way, this country, we need to, yeah, we need to, in a way, listen more to each other so we don't fall into one narrative, into the bubble of one narrative, right? So we're doing this now. We have bubbles, right? One bubble with only one narrative, the other bubble with the other narrative, no dialogue. And we are in danger, right? The text would warn us against sticking to one narrative and not being in tune with other narratives, no matter how crazy this sounds, right? The absence of dialogue is problematic when you are only in one narrative, when your Facebook feed only has one thing going on, right? When the news you watch only one narrative, beware, right? So yes, I agree with you. Very good. Let's see. Oh, go ahead.
Um, I'm playing like devil's advocate right now, but like I guess in Christianity though, like there are references to Jesus saying like a very absolute statements and very like, it's either my way or the highway kind of deal. So like I feel like has kind of like goes not, it might go against like this idea of like diversity in a sense. Um
Yes,
yeah.
you're thinking of when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? This very famous passage where he says, I am the way, whoever comes to God must go through me. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and also like even like Apostle Paul's writing throughout like his epistles too, like he does mention that like there is like an absolute, and which is Jesus in a sense, in terms of the Christian faith, like unless if you follow like that religion.
Yeah, so there's been a friend of mine had an interesting interpretation of this I am the way quote by Jesus. So I'm just going to share that briefly, right? He said, well, I am the way doesn't mean, it means follow in my footsteps, live like I did, and you cannot find God unless you live the sacrificial, loving life that I lived, right? So it's less about believing in Jesus than following in the footsteps of Jesus. In other words, living sacrificially. And it's true that if one is not capable of living sacrificially and loving in that way, one cannot come close to God, right? So he saw it more like in a pragmatic sense, I am the way, than in a kind of ontological sense. Does that make sense? So we can always salvage the New Testament because the teachings of Jesus are very fluid, right? It's the church later who made Jesus the dogma, believe in Jesus, the way, right? But this is, I think Jesus is talking more pragmatically and not dogmatically. Does that make sense? Oh?
Yeah, yeah.
He would be. He wasn't interested in dogma. He was interested in ethics, right? Like the God we're studying right now, right? So a lot of similarities. Actually, I'm hoping, right? Is it who was it who said that? Was it Kirschnitz? Who was seeing the difference between the Old Testament and New Testament God? Was that you, Kirschnitz? Who was it? Which it was a girl. Which Butterfield? No. Where's my other Perso maybe? Anyway, someone mentioned, right? I forget who, that when it
It
comes
was
to
me.
it
It
was
was me.
okay, great. Are you starting to see Perso that maybe it's kind of the same, right? That the Old Testament also has this similar, how shall I put it, atmosphere of, love and forgiveness that you see in the New Testament. Are you starting to see a little bit Perso?
I mean, I see it, but like also at the same time, like in terms of how the punishments or like I guess you could say the repercussions of not following the ethics of God, it's carried out differently. And I'm not sure if that's because God himself is going through a transformation just as the humans are throughout the Bible, or if it's because if it's because he's always been the same God and it's just the humans are different. That's where my internal conflict
Yes,
kind of comes in.
I think you're right. He's dealing with a different population, right? Dealing with, Jesus arrives, they're pretty sophisticated already, right? But these guys here, right, they just came out of the earth, right? But what I'm seeing in terms of consistency, right, I'm seeing a God who is interested in human evolution. That's what I'm seeing from beginning to end, including when Jesus comes on the scene. he's less interested in people worshiping him than in people becoming like him, right? And this is human evolution, right? So I'm seeing, I think, pretty consistently a God who is interested in the evolution of humankind into a more ethical, right, version of themselves. And this is constant until mother's house, father's house, same idea until the New Testament, right? Does that make, can you see that, Perso, at least? Can we agree on that?
Yeah, we would agree.
Okay, great. Okay, let's see. I don't know your name very well. Brulidakis, go ahead.
Hi. Well, I was just thinking, I was taught that the God who speaks to humans, even in the Old Testament, is, well, I was taught that there's kind of three parts of God: the Father, Son, and Spirit. And I think it kind of parallels to like Elohim versus Adonai, and that like Adonai, or the Son, is the one who always communicates with people and then comes to earth as Jesus. And so I think that maybe the difference comes more from actually experiencing humanity versus just communicating with them.
So in what sense are you saying the difference? Where is it coming
Like
from?
that when Jesus comes to earth, he seems a little bit more compassionate, but I think it's more just that he's communicating with humanity better. I'm sorry for the background noise.
Yeah, no worries. Yes, I mean, God really is dealing with a whole different set of people, right? Here with the Tower of Babel, and then later on within the people of Israel who are already pretty civilized and have cultivated a sense of God and otherness and so forth, he's going to speak differently. But there is, in my view, a consistency in terms of the ethical development of humankind. This is a God who is constantly pushing for that, right? Whether he does it from the mother's house or the father's house is the same goal, right? Good. Okay, let's see. That was nice. Anybody else see a problem with the Tower of Babel before I give you the, since we have, and I'm wondering if we can just stop there. Like, I feel like we could stop there and like, no, let's not. Okay. Let me still give you my parallel of between 11 and 12. So let me give you this brief parallel that I'm seeing, which will help illuminate the problem of Babel, right? So there's four main points, one of which we already talked about. Point one, the Babylonians settle, right? What does Abraham, how is he different from the Babylonians? Babylonians want to stay in one place. How is Abraham different from the text that you read in Genesis 12? See if you read it. No, nobody knows? Yes, Edmonds?
I mean, Abraham wants to journey on. He's told by the Lord to leave his country, to sort of go to a new land, and that's something that he is willing to do, and he does voluntarily.
Okay, very good, right? So the Babylonians, they want to stay in one place. Abraham is called, however, to move, to be on the constant move, right? So what's the lesson? Why does God prefer nomads, right, than the settlers? Why is God more comfortable with people who are on the move than people who settle? What is wrong with settling, and what is good about moving? Rudolph, go ahead.
You're muted.
Pardon me. I don't think there's anything wrong with settling, but moving around has the advantage of getting new impressions, of being a perpetual learner, of doing something that you haven't done before in order to get to know other people or achieve something that you haven't had before.
Very good, right? Being on the move corresponds very well to a God who is himself on the move, right? So God, in a way, is inviting us to be constantly open, flexible, reaching out to others, right? Instead of staying in our assumptions, our perceptions, our dogma, right? This is an invitation to move beyond our, not just physically, but intellectually, right? Beyond our representations. That God is more comfortable with those who are able to do that than those who are settled, right? Edmonds, do you want to add?
So I was trying to find the exact quote, but I believe that there's something where God gives an instruction to sort of fill the earth with descendants, right? So isn't there something to be said for the idea that God really wants not just individual cities to be built, but He wants the entire world to be populated with Adam's descendants?
Yes, that was my third point. Let me add that. Let's make that the second point, right? On the one hand, right, they want to stay among themselves, but God is putting Abraham among the nations. This is pure mother's house, right? He's saying, no, I don't want you stuck over here with your own people. I want you to be part of the nations. I want you to enter the world. I want you to push your limits. I want you to be part of life rather than separated from life, right? So this is also a typical mother's house teaching, right? Very good. So that's the second one. Who else saw? Okay, good. Christodoulou, do you want to add?
I was gonna say there is a moral dimension to this as well. Like I think that there are some societies that have talked about like cities being decadent and places of immorality, and like being nomadic, being tied to the earth, like being more in tune with what's going on.
Yes, the cities actually have a really bad reputation in the Hebrew Bible. The writers don't like those cities, right? So, and they prefer nomads, right? And now it's the cities who are tied to the earth, by the way, because they're the agricultural centers. So it's not like New York, right, where we don't know what a potato comes from, right? So it's a little different, right? It's agriculture society versus nomadic society. And God seems to be more comfortable with nomads than He is with farmers, right? So for the reasons that we're talking about. Perso, do you want to add?
I was gonna say, which is kind of interesting because in the Republic and through what Socrates is talking about, like with the perfect city, I could kind of see some parallels between the two.
Tell us, tell us. I'm interested.
Um, like, and even with like Thomas More's Utopia, also, like they both talk about building a perfect city. They both talk about what goes into building a perfect city and why cities are imperfect because of corruption, because of people. How can we change people's mindsets to make it better for the general public? Thomas More specifically focuses on the corruption of people. He talks about like a perfect city that obviously couldn't exist because it would require everybody to have like-minded mindsets. So I
This
thought
is
that was kind of parallel towards
really
this.
interesting what you're saying, because Babel is trying, in a way, to be the perfect city, right? They have the one mindset. They're trying to unite the mindset in what the second author you mentioned, right? And God, in a way, is saying, don't go for the utopia, right? There is no perfect city. I don't like perfect cities in a way, right? Because in a way, the perfect city becomes perhaps inevitably the homogeneous city, right? Each time you have a utopia, it's like we all have to be like this. And nomadism is constantly moving, right? Changing. So very interesting comment, Perso. I like that a lot. So yeah, it seems like God would be uncomfortable with the perfect city for a number of interesting reasons. That would be a great like term paper, right? I can already see a thesis coming out of this. Thank you. Good. So I will make all that point one. Okay, I think it all fits with point one. Point two, I noticed something. The Babelians are saying, let us make a name for ourselves. Did anybody see the corresponding idea in Genesis 12 and how it's formulated? Parallels, right? Anybody see that? Look at Genesis 12 and tell me if you see the corresponding idea of the Babelians' idea that we will make a name for ourselves. Let's see. Perso, did you want to answer that, or is it just your hand from before?
Not just my hand from before.
Okay. So look in the beginning of 12, you have the corresponding thought, 12 verse 2. Rudolph, go ahead. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Fingers are faster than my eyes. He spells it out, and it says, and I will make of thee a great nation, and will bless thee, and make thy name great.
Yes, you see the parallel? Okay, now let's analyze, right? They make a name for themselves, and then in chapter 12, God is saying, I will make a name for you. Okay, what's going on? What's the difference between the two mentalities? What can you sense just in that those two Christodoulou, go ahead.
The difference is, making a name for yourself is like taking power from God. Is like an assumption. Only God can give you like a great name, for example.
Okay, very good, right? Great name means success, prosperity, right? Identity, calling, right? And in the text, right, seems to be saying you cannot create your own prosperity or your own calling or your own identity. These are given to you, right? So do you notice how we are moving away in chapter 11? We are moving away from the garden theology, right? Garden theology where we receive, where God is working on our behalf. Now we are working and we will make this happen, right? Here we are striving, right? And Genesis 12 brings us back to the garden, right? By saying, no, the best things in life will be given to you. You don't have to strive. You don't have to stress. You don't have to sweat. You have to work, but ultimately the best things of life will be offered to you, right? The book of Ecclesiastes is going to make the same point. There's a beautiful quote in the book of Ecclesiastes that says, love and work are in the hands of God, right? These are two things you cannot make happen. Your career and your love life. You can do a little bit, but ultimately it's given to you, right? So very beautiful idea here. And again, God being uncomfortable with this idea that, y'all are trying to make this happen when these things you cannot make happen. Certain things can only be offered to you by grace, right? Very nice. Last one is the one that Edmonds mentioned earlier, so please write it down. This is the notion of limits, right? In the Babel story, nothing you do will be impossible. But in the Abraham story, we have already from the start a huge limitation set on Abraham. Anybody knows what it is? It's mentioned right in the beginning. It's a terrible thorn in his flesh the whole time, ruins everything. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, this is actually a little earlier, 11 verse 31, I think. God, where is it? Hold on. I'll find it. If you can guess what it is, speak up. Trying to find the actual text.
Is it that he can't have children?
Yes, exactly. And it's somewhere in the text. Actually, it's throughout the story of Abraham, right? This is the huge limitation for Abraham. He cannot, this is the one thing he needs to do to become prosperous. This is the one thing that's limiting, that's ruining everything, right? So limitations right away placed on Abraham in order to develop something in him, right? So very good. All right. So you have now a good, I think, how shall I put it? Now we can conclude a little bit on Genesis 4 to 11, and you can tell me whether you see more clearly whether that it belongs to the mother's house. So let's go over that. What are the 4 points again of the mother's house? I think I wrote them down somewhere. Christodoulou, I think you answered that question last time. Can you answer it again? The 4 points of the mother's house? Or whoever else has it first.
Yeah, so I have intimacy, temple to garden, sacrificial love, and immersing into the world.
Okay. Yes. All right. So let's look at chapter 4. Are you seeing? So how is point 1 connecting nicely with chapter 4 and 11? Let's do both at the same time. How are you seeing a God who is not on a throne, judging from above, but working with? Are you seeing this in the texts? Show me how. Tell me. Remind me. Olivera, go ahead.
The dealings of God with Cain, because he was not trying to punish Cain. At the moment, it seems like that there was the lesson that Cain need to learn was to understand his relationship with others, understand he was not the only one, and then by addressing some attention to his brother, God was showing him, giving him a lesson instead of a punishment.
Yeah, very good. As you're talking, I'm thinking how God is similar to Socrates, right? Socrates is not teaching anything. He's trying to draw it out of you through questions, right? And here we have God. Maybe this is a good answer to O, right? Why God asking so many questions, right? Well, because God maybe is a Socratic figure trying to draw out of you your fullest potential through the questioning. So, yes, with Cain, he's acting like Socrates, trying to pull out of Cain what he knows is there, right? And Cain is not doing so good, right? In the like most people with Socrates, kind of failing lamentably with the dialogue, but you can see that, right? And with Babel, of course, it's a little less Socratic, right? It's a little more, but still, you have this notion of redemptive versus punitive, right? So definitely for that first point, we are in the mother's house. What about the second point, temple versus garden? Chapter 4 is a bit tricky. I don't see either. Well, let's see what you guys come up with. Temple versus garden in chapter 4 and 11. So striving versus receiving, right? That's what it is. Temple is works, garden is grace. So what are you seeing in chapter 4 to 11 that is closer to the garden than to the temple? Or is a criticism of the temple, I guess. Olivera?
I can try again, but this is a guess. So, for example, Abel had a much more relaxed attitude. He was not so striving as Cain, and then I think he had more of a guarding on the way that he was like a more willing to receive. He was like an outsider, and then Cain was more striving. He has the idea to go and give the fruits to God. He was trying to, active, trying to please, even though his heart, we can say, was not like on a receiving end. And then I don't know, maybe
Yeah, I was perplexed. I didn't know what to say. So thank you. You're right. And we'll see this so flagrantly in the book of Ecclesiastes when we talk about, again, the word Abel. It will be one of the main concepts in Ecclesiastes, because the word in Ecclesiastes for vanity is actually Abel, right? So yes, you're anticipating nicely. Abel is more, he's not striving, he's not working, he's more on the margins receiving, when Cain is more of a striver and God is looking at Abel. So this is, and it will become very clear, this distinction between works and grace in the book of Ecclesiastes, which is also going to bring up these two characters in chapter 2. We will see these two characters again. So excellent. And chapter 11, works versus grace in chapter 11. Anybody? Or criticism of the temple, maybe? What are you seeing in chapter 11 for the mother's house? I'm seeing more of a criticism of the temple, since he's destroying. It's a temple, right? This tower we believe is actually a ziggurat, which was the shape of the ancient temples, right? Like it's a kind of pyramid that was built in these regions and which were temples, right? So these guys are building a temple, and God is like, in a way, interrupting that, right? Williams, go ahead.
No, I was going to say God wants natural progress, but not abnormal progress. So every time humanity tries to have one specific point of progress, he basically has to force them on a particular path of evolution. Like I keep talking about evolution because that's what I keep thinking of, is that he's forcing this specific path of evolution. Like the reason why the tower falls is because, like you said, he didn't want like a fascist system where there was only one ideology. Yeah. But on top of that, it's also about the fact that, like, if there was only one system of religion, your religion could easily fall. But if there's many systems of beliefs, your religion is you're more likely to have some of the practices of your faith be carried on in other religions.
Okay, good. So you're looking at this, the fourth part of Mother's House here, where, yeah, I like that, where diversity is seen as, is celebrated, right? Versus just one way of doing things. So that would be the last one, right? When we talk about world versus separation versus entering the world. This is really, the Babel is really going into the world instead of staying and thinking all alike. So very good. Yes, excellent. Okay, so that's the last point. What about the third point? Love versus law. That one's tricky. Anybody seeing it for chapter 4 or 11? I'm thinking too. I haven't thought of this yet.
Um. Oh, sorry. Anyways, but chapter 4, love versus law. I think we're discussing it in the group, and um, Cain's wait, no, Abel's ability to give God um the first fruits and like the valuable stuff. Yes, it shows like a part of the law which was, I guess, necessary for Abel to do such a thing, but I can also argue that it shows a lot of like this intimate like love between Abel and God, like because I don't think anybody would just give their valuables to somebody unless there is like some sort of connection and like some sort of like, you know, love and intimacy there. And
Nice.
because
Mhm.
Cain didn't do such a thing, you could say that there was a lack of, he was upholding the law, but at the same time there was no demonstration of love, genuine
Nice.
fidelity.
Yes, yes, he was going through the motions, but we see his heart, right, in the end of the story. And in a way, the text also seems to privilege. I mean, the text moves away from the sacrifices. That's not the most important. The most important is the relationship of Cain with his brother in the end, right? So God is kind of shifting away from the ritual to the ethical again, right? So very nice. Yes, I like that. I think I saw Williams and then I saw Brulidakis. Did I see Williams? Was I wrong? Okay, so Brulidakis, go ahead.
Um, I was thinking that even with the way that God handles the situation with Cain is more love than law, because he's setting a precedent. Like, this is the first murder, and what he does to the first murderer is let him, he banishes him, but he lets him start a family, and his children create the first city. This isn't like it could be a lot more harsh.
Yes.
And it seems like he's still giving him a life.
Very good. Yes, I like that. Excellent. Good. And then the last one we saw, right, with I guess both Cain and the Babylonians are forced into exile, right? They're forced to move beyond their own comfort zones and enter the world, right? In a way, kind of like Adam and Eve also were pushed out, right? So there's really this movement throughout this 10 chapters or 11 chapters where God is trying to push people out of their comfort zone into the world, get to know other people, enter other worlds, right? This is something that God seems to be pushing for, right? Very good. Okay, so this brings us to the end of the book of Genesis. This is so sad. We're going to now move to other books. The next book we'll do is the book of Job. And I want to talk a little bit about Job briefly. In preparation for Job is next, I believe, right? Correct? On the syllabus, it says Job. Am I on the right track? Can someone confirm? Yes? Okay, great. All right, so just a few words about Job, and then I'll talk to you about your test, which is due this weekend, and then we'll call it a day, right? Book of Job, like all wisdom literature, we're seeing this. I think you've seen this now. Keyword for Book of Job: nothing is as it seems. Okay, we saw this with Genesis, right? We saw that it looks, if we just read on the surface, right, we are dealing with a God who seems very insecure, capricious, crushing human ambition, right? So we have to go deeper and read with more subtlety, right, in order to get to the real message. To get to the mother's house, you have to be subtle. Otherwise, you're stuck on the father's house level, right? So Book of Job is the same. People have interpreted the book of Job to mean if you follow God, if you keep all his commandments, in the end, you will be happy, right? And they're using this story to illustrate this idea that if you follow God, in the end, you will be happy. As all wisdom literature, we know that nothing is as it seems. And so what I'm going to show is that this is not actually the main message of the book of Job. Okay, so if you have been taught, right, in the past that the book of Job is about remaining faithful to God, and in the end, if we remain faithful, God will reward us with material goods, right? This has been the traditional interpretation, but because the book of Job is wisdom literature, we know we have to read more deeply, right? And one of the keys that will help you get to the meaning, and I want to talk to you about this right now, is the way the book is structured. So I want to bring this home right now so that you can read it correctly when you go home this weekend or whenever, right? Book of Job has 3 sections. It has a prologue, it has a dialogue part, and then it has an epilogue. Okay? And what's interesting is that there is a difference in the way the author is writing when he writes the prologue, when he writes the dialogues, when he writes the epilogue. Does anybody know what shift occurs between the prologue and the dialogues, and then again a shift from the dialogues to the epilogue? Anybody notice a difference in the way the author is writing? Those who know the book already. Did you notice a difference in tone, in language? Anybody notice this? Okay, you will. I'll tell you. Prologue is in prose. The dialogues are in poetry, right? And then back to the epilogue, prose. Okay, now if you're the author and you're writing a book and you're writing in prose and then poetry and then prose, where are you trying to direct the attention of your readers? What's the part you want your readers to focus on? What do you think? Christo Dulu.
The poetry, right? It has to be the odd man out.
Yes, right? You're reading prose and all of a sudden there's poetic section, then you pay more attention. This is more interesting. This is more substantial, right? And then back to the, so this has meaning. There's an intention. What the author is doing, and make sure you get this you really have to get if you're going to understand Job and not mess it up, right? What the author is doing is saying, the prologue and the epilogue is not the main thing I'm trying to tell you. What I want to tell you is going to be found in the poetic section. So don't be fooled when you read the prologue and when you read the epilogue. Whatever theology you see in the prologue, whatever theology you see in the epilogue is not the point I'm going to make. Okay? So when you read in the prologue, yeah, God was messing around with Satan, and then he decided to tempt Job, and y'all get all angry at God for doing that. Beware, because this is the part that the author is saying, this is not important, this is not what I'm going to say. This is the setup, this is me putting together characters, I'm telling you a story, don't take it literally. That's what the author is saying, right? When he writes it in prose, saying, this is just me putting together characters, I'm just setting up a drama here. Don't take this seriously. Do not derive your theology from this section. Are we good? I don't want nobody to go around in your reading assignments complaining that God made a deal with Satan, because this is in the prologue, and we know that the prologue is not where the author wants us to derive our theology. Are we good? Put your hand in the screen if you're following. Okay, then you'll go to the epilogue and you'll be like, ooh, Job got all his stuff back. Yeah, see? When we follow God, we get epilogue. No theology you should derive from the epilogue. So whatever you think you've understood from the epilogue, don't trust yourself, because the truth of the matter will be found only in the dialogues. Whatever theology the person wants us to gain, whatever knowledge of God or knowledge of what it means to be spiritual, whatever knowledge of suffering that we are to acquire in this text will be found only in the dialogues. So be very careful when you're reading that you don't let yourself be influenced by the prologue and the epilogue, which the author is writing actually in a way that is often kind of poking fun at traditional religion. Now that's the second point I'm making. The prologue and the epilogue is actually a caricature of what people believed at the time about God, about suffering. So the author is actually making fun of traditional views on God and on suffering, and especially the whole book is making fun of this notion that if you believe in God, he will reward you richly. Whole book is denouncing that, right? The whole book is reversing that and putting that into a question, challenging that, right? So be careful. Read the prologue and the epilogue, knowing that the author is actually poking fun at a certain way of seeing God, a kind of simplistic religiosity, right? What he's going to actually want to teach us about God is found in the complexity of the poetry. Are you good? Are you following me on that? Are you ready, you think, to read the book of Job? Okay, so we have to be very subtle with Job. Job is easy to read, really hard to get. It took me years to finally explain it correctly to students. Like, that's how complicated it was. I was racking my brain to explain it for 10 years, and then finally I got it. So we should be good. But yeah, so be very careful. I think this is the main thing I wanted to say about Job, is to be very careful that it's a subtle book, and it's a book belonging to wisdom literature. We know that this book will necessarily be a subversion of traditional religion, right? This is the typical of wisdom literature. So there's two things about wisdom literature. One, it's subtle, nothing is as it seems, and two, it is systematically a subversion of traditional religion. So for example, in traditional religion, we learn in the books of Moses, right, that if we are good people, we will prosper. American Christianity is still on that wavelength. If you go to Barnes and Nobles and you go to the Christian section, it's all about being prosperous, making money, right? Finding the love of your life. This is all the same thing. If I believe in God, I will succeed. This is the message of American Christianity. If you believe in God, you will succeed. Here, plant a seed so you can become rich. Right? We know these right from the preachers, right? So we are still there, right? We really believe, I think, in this country, a lot of us, that if we obey God and follow God, we will be prosperous. The book of Job is there to ruin completely this idea. The book of Job will make everybody who believes this deeply uncomfortable. Book of Job is going to tell us there's more to this story than that, right? So we have to be prepared with the book of Job to also become uncomfortable in our traditional beliefs about God. Book of Job is going to explode that. Wisdom literature always explodes, whatever the institution or whatever the teachings of the day are. The wisdom literature always going to make us uncomfortable within the confines of traditional religiosity. So that's the second thing with wisdom literature that's important. Okay, so you're ready, hopefully, now. So I haven't read the Divine Comedy, Williams, but maybe you can tell us some more words on why you think it's like the Divine Comedy. Go ahead.
The Divine Comedy was basically, no, it's not the Divine Comedy. Sorry, it's Dante's Inferno.
Mhm.
Dante's Inferno was basically it was a critique against the palpable institutions of the time, because the guy who wrote it was upset because he didn't get to become Pope. And he basically wrote this giant hit piece about like all the people in the establishment, and it was like just he used their names in the story, and they were like really angry with him. And he was like, "Listen, I was supposed to be Pope. This is what I was supposed to get." Like, and he like I don't know, but I understand what you're saying. Where it's a satire, and he was just really pissed. So.
Yes, very good. Yes, so then it's the same thing. Yes, this is the prologue and the epilogue are satirical. Thank you for bringing up that word, right? It's a satire of traditional religion, so we cannot base our theology on those. We know we have to go deeper. We know things are more subtle, right? Finally, the last thing I wanted to say is that, yes, the book of Job, it will be part of the mother's house, and you will understand why as we get into the text, right? Well, we're going to see some very interesting developments. Okay, I think you're ready for the book of Job. Let me talk to you briefly about the test, which you have this weekend. I'm going to, right now after class, put a bunch of questions on Blackboard. You only pick one, okay? Don't do all of them. Pick one, but it's an essay question, so you want to write as much as possible. Bring in all of your expertise, right, into this question. So as you respond, I want you to bring in as much as possible of what we talked about in class, of course, connected to your to the question, right? Don't go talking to me about Cain when the question is on Eve, right? So you want to stay focused, but you want to really show how much you know, right? So write me a nice essay question on that, and about 1 page, single space, 1 point 1 to 1.5 pages single spaced for your answer. It's a pretty good, and I'm gonna try and find questions that are more reflection questions, so you have to think a little bit. It won't be just, you know, memorizing whatever we talked about. You do have to kind of, I'm gonna try and make you think. So that's for the test, and you put it in the folder, right, in the Google Drive. On Sunday, yeah, try to finish, yeah, by Saturday night, so that I can read them on Sunday. So, I mean, you can pull off an all-nighter if you want, but I just need to see them on Sunday when I get to it around like 10. So you could actually do it Sunday morning if you wanted until 10, you can do it. So the other thing you need to do is your essay. The essay is 1.5 pages, single spaced. The essay is more now you reflecting on your own journey. So you can talk to me about your journey with God or your gendered journey, right? So as a woman, is there anything, or as a man, is there anything you caught in the teachings that you find interesting or exciting, or is there anything you learned about God that you find interesting, right? So anything that struck you as interesting, as something that moved you, that you feel like it's contributing to your own journey as a person, right? This is what I want to hear about. So it's much more personal. It's kind of you in discovering these ideas and telling me about it. And you write about 1.5 pages, kind of like a journal entry or whatever on that. Oh, you have a question?
Okay, so just essay, just like there's really no guideline or questions. Just
Yeah, anything you were excited about. That's what I want to hear. So this is kind of you reacting to some of what we talked about. So if there was anything that you were like, oh, wow, as a man, I really found out interesting. I'm learning more about my gender, or, you know, as a believer or as an atheist, I found this interesting in the text, you know, that I can draw for myself. So anything that made you excited at one point, I want to hear about it. That's basically the idea. Yeah. So that's that. And let's see. That's all, right? And then next week we start Book of Job, so you would read that and do a reading assignment for that. Any questions? Yes, Williams.
So you said it's going to be, we have the test and it's 1.5 pages. Then we do an essay. That's another 1 page.
Yeah,
Right?
switch it. Let's make the test 1 page, single space, 1 to 1.5, depending on how much you want to write. And then the essay, yes, 1.5, also single space. So let's make the same thing for both. 1.5 single spaced for both. Yeah, that will be good. Mm.
All right. And okay, so you're going to give us the questions for the essay.
Like right
Because
now.
the people, yeah, because I still don't have access to Blackboard.
Oh no. Okay.
Same here.
Because remember, if you're on e-permit, they ain't going to let you in.
What was that?
What?
What is that? The e-permit. Let me stop the recording actually.